So we're very fortunate today. We have this very auspicious day. We can honor Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. So we have a verse in his honor. Namo Gaura Kishoraya Sakshad Vairagya Murtaye.
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 Vipralamba Rasambode Padambu Jayate Namaha.
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 Namo Gauraya Kishoraya Sakshad Vairagya Murtaye.
Namo Gaura Kishoraya Sakshad Vairagya Murtaye.
Vipralamba Rasambode Padambu Jayate Namaha.
Vipralamba Rasambode Padambu Jayate Namaha.
I offer my respectful obeisances unto Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. The spiritual master of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, who is renunciation personified. He is always merged in a feeling of separation and intense love of Krishna. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvase Susunyavadi Paskyata Deshvatarane Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So I feel very honored and unqualified to talk about such an exalted personality as Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, the spiritual master of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But I will do my best with your blessings and encouragement. So most of what we know about Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj was written in a periodical called Sajjani Toshni. Sajjani Toshni was a monthly periodical established by the father of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in about 1884, if I remember properly. And when Bhaktivinoda Thakur retired from his service as in the British government, he personally started editing this periodical. And Srila Bhakti Siddhanta would occasionally write for it and very often oversee what was written for it. So in the year 1919, which is now 101 years ago, they had a series of articles that were overseen by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur on the life and teachings of Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. It was written in Bengali and translated, so we have a translation of that, fortunately. Prabhupada did not speak very often about Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, but he did say that in relation to him, Paramahamsas, they do not come in the society because many people may imitate them, and those people will fall down from imitating them. Therefore, they stay aloof. Just like Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, he was aloof, a bhajananandi. So the idea being that for preaching, one on the highest stage will come down to the lower stage, a secondary stage, and then act in an exemplary way. But in the case of Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, although occasionally he did preach, and there's some quotes that we can read from him, very often he acted in an avadhuta-like way, on the highest stages, feeling separation from Krishna. And ordinary people would misunderstand that, sometimes imitate him to their detriment. So therefore he stayed away. But it was not that he was unconcerned. He was very concerned, as we shall see. So he is Sakstad Vairagya Murtaye. He's the personification of renunciation, Vairagya. And at the same time, he's always merged in this ocean of the mellow of separation from Krishna. So therefore, he is such an exalted personality. He had no care for his body or for anything material, for that matter. So the story of his life, as mentioned in this Sajjani Toshni, well, here I have before this series of articles begins, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gives an introduction. So I wanted to read this introduction. It's his realizations after his first meeting with Gaura Kishore Das Babaji. He says, "For so long I have been living in this material world, trying to bring sense gratification within the grasp of my hand. I often thought that the sense objects would fulfill all my shortcomings. I even attained different facets of enjoyment that were indeed rare, but my personal needs were never met. I had the association of aristocratic persons, but seeing their different faults, I could not praise them. The most merciful Lord, Sri Gaurasunda, seeing me in this lamentable condition of adversity, permitted his two most intimate associates to bestow their blessings upon me. I was always intoxicated with worldly false ego and the desire for name and fame. I deprived myself of my real benefit, but because of the influence of the devotional service rendered in my previous lives, I came into the association of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who is my spiritual well-wisher. My spiritual guide, Srila Gaura Kishore, would come and visit Srila Bhaktivinoda many times and often live with him. Srila Bhaktivinoda, out of his compassion for me, pointed out my spiritual master, Srila Gaura Kishore. After glancing upon the divine figure of my master, the extent of my false ego was diminished. But by gradually observing the wonderful spiritual qualities of my master, Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji, I realized that a Vaishnava could live in this material world and be of exemplary character." And then the series of articles begins after this introduction. So Gaura Kishore Das Babaji, as was the custom in that time in India, he married at a very young age. And he worked as a broker in the grain business. But as fate or Krishna would have it, when he was just 29, his wife passed away. And at that time, he met a disciple of Jagannath Das Babaji and took initiation from him. And he started living as a Babaji himself in Vrindavan. And he lived in a solitary way for almost 30 years in Vrindavan. And his austerity was extraordinary. He practiced this begging a little food from up to 7 houses, from 1 house to 7 houses every day. And whatever he gathered in that way, he would eat, and that would be his meal. And if perhaps he didn't get enough, he would eat mud from the banks of the Jamuna to fill his stomach. Very auspicious mud, but mud nonetheless. Then he says, Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji saw all the Vrajabasis, the residents of Vrindavan, as being direct personal associates of Radha and Krishna. As a result of this vision, he would pay respects to every person, cow, animal, bird, tree, creeper, insect, ant in the holy dham. While staying in Varshana, he made a flower garland every day for Radha and Krishna. So by his sincerity, his genuine spiritual attainments, and his unparalleled renunciation, and austerities, he became very famous in Vrindavan as a Bhajananandi. But he never enjoyed any of this fame and adoration at all. He rejected all inclinations for sense gratification and continued his service. And then, later on, in the year 1894 in March, the Yog Pit was discovered in Sridham, Mayapur. And at that time, Gaura Kishore Das Babaji asked permission from Jagannath Das Babaji to go to Navadvip. And he received that permission. So he shifted from Vrindavan to Navadvip, and he spent the rest of his years in Navadvip Dham, living in different villages and realizing that they were non-different from Vrindavan. And for clothing, what he would do is he would go to the area where they cremated bodies, and he would take the cloth that had covered the corpse and wash it and use that to cover himself. Yeah, his idea was he was totally indifferent to worldly existence, and his renunciation in that sense was matchless. Spontaneously devoted to worshiping the Lord, serving the Lord. And his idea also was to always remain independent of others, and therefore he used these rejected items. If he begged for some grains that were uncooked, he would search for rejected cooking pots and cook them. The rejected grains in the rejected cooking pots, and nourish himself in that way. He used to sing a bhajan, which means by receiving Nittai's mercy, one gets Gauranga's mercy, which makes one eligible for Krishna Prema. Once one has Krishna Prema, one can attain the service of Srimati Radharani and the gopis. So this was his inner meditation always. And at the same time, he exemplified, Prabhupada said he exemplified, because of his complete dedication to Krishna, his complete renunciation of material comforts and acquisitions, all the purports and conclusions of the scriptures were illuminated from within his heart. So when Prabhupada does mention him, he mentions how he was not particularly literate. He was not a scholar. And yet when people came to him with questions about the scriptures, or if he heard readings of the scriptures, he would comment on them with great depth of understanding, great nuances. So he was enlightened from within his heart. It was not a matter of material erudition, but Krishna as his super soul gave him realizations. And he was reminded, for the Vaishnavas, they were reminded when they saw him of Raghunath Das Babaji in his renunciation. Raghunath Das Babaji, when he gave up his household life, he would very often not eat at all, or just take some buttermilk every so often. Extreme renunciation. So this was reminiscence of that. Grandeur and opulence of every kind was always waiting with folding hands to serve him, but he never accepted such grandeur and opulence. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, many types of persons, clever, judicious, young, old, foolish, scholarly, and proud, came in contact with Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji. Yet they could not realize his identity. This is the mystic opulence of the Lord's pure devotee. Many people accepted this Babaji dress artificially because they wanted profit, adoration, and distinction. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, my master, Srila Gaura Kishore, never accepted a devious mode of life, as the sincerity of his activities were self-evident. His affectionate nature was matchless. His affectionate nature was matchless. And whenever he would obtain opulent offerings, he remained fixed in his renunciation. So we have a genuine person on the highest level of attainment of love for Krishna. At some point in his pastimes, he appeared to be going blind. his vision got weaker and weaker. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati offered to take him to Calcutta for medical treatment. But he said, I will never go to the world of Maya, Calcutta. Jai Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda, Jai Shri Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman, Jai Shri Shri Gauranitai Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Bhaktivinoda Thakur said that his son, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, would accompany Gaura Kishore Das Babaji to Calcutta. But another of Gaura Kishore Das Babaji's aspects of renunciation is that he did not want to accept service from anyone. So he refused. Even though he was requested hundreds of times, he would not accept this. So in this regard, there's a pastime regarding his blindness related by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Although apparently blind, Babaji Maharaj once arrived alone at Sri Mayapur at the Yog Pit at 2 o'clock in the morning. Later that morning, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, amazed to see his spiritual master, inquired, "When did you arrive, Gurudev?" Babaji Maharaj replied, "I arrived at 2 this morning." Astonished, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati asked, "Who brought you here last night? How did you find someone to show you the path?" Gaura Kishore Das Babaji replied, "Oh, someone showed me the proper way." Srila Bhaktisiddhanta then said, "Externally you appear to be blind. If someone had not brought you that long distance by hand, then how could you have come? Was it Krishna who brought you here last night?" Hearing this, Babaji Maharaj could only smile. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, sharing an internal relationship with his spiritual master, realized the purport of this exchange. In those days, there were no footpaths to walk from Kulia, where Gaura Kishore Das Babaji had been staying, to Mayapur, and no landing places for a boat. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta again inquired, "Who could have brought you across the river in the dead of night?" Srila Gaura Kishore, in the same amused way, said, "One person took me across the river." His disciple then realized that the person was none other than Lord Krishna, the son of Nanda Maharaj. So there was another pastime involving Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, that at some point he was preaching to a group of aspiring devotees, and he spoke in a harsh way, and one of the devotees who was there became upset in his heart and left the assembly and started living by himself. And then sometime later he came back into the association of Gaura Kishore Das Babaji. And Gaura Kishore Das Babaji asked him, "Why did you leave this place? We were discussing topics of Lord Krishna." And the person said that, "I thought it was better to live in a solitary place and do my own private worship rather than hear the sharp words of a sadhu." Gaura Kishore Das Babaji replied, "Those devotees who speak sharp words to drive away the witch of the illusory energy are actually the only real devotees and the true friend of the conditioned living entities. The miserable living entity hears the harsh words and abusive language of his relatives until the end of his life, yet he never desires to leave their association. On the other hand, he absorbs himself in trying to please them by offering them his service. But when a devotee of the Lord, who always wants the living entity's ultimate benefit, says something that's apparently harsh in an attempt to drive away the illusory energy, Maya, that same conditioned soul who tolerates the abusive words of his relatives stops coming and abandons the devotee's company. If you want to perform proper bhajan, then you must accept the harsh language of the devotees as the curing medicine by which Maya can be abandoned. Then you can become advanced enough to purely chant the holy name." Hare Krishna. Prabhupada also from time to time would speak in a strong way. Sometimes devotees would become upset, but we can see from the words of Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji that this is for the benefit of the individual, and it should be understood in that light. There's also the famous pastime that Srila Prabhupada did speak about, where Gaura Kishore Das Babaji took up residence next to a latrine. And the reason being that as he became famous, people would come to him and ask him for material blessings. Please ensure that my son does well on his exams. Please ensure that my health is restored, and so forth. So he became disturbed in his bhajan by these material requests. And so he managed to use a latrine in Krishna's service. Advanced devotees can use everything in Krishna's service. Because when he sat by the latrine to do his bhajan, chant Hare Krishna, the obnoxious smell there stopped these materialistic-minded people from coming to him. And at one point, the municipality decided that they would build him a proper bhajan kutir. And they came to offer him this service. And he actually went inside the latrine and he said, I have a bhajan kutir, there's no need. There's no need for you to build one. So he did this for 6 months, this austerity. And his point was very profound. He wanted to point out that the stench of false prestige, lust for the opposite sex, and desire for wealth under the pretense of service rendered to the Supreme Lord emits a more impure odor than ordinary stool. Shall I read that again? Okay. Srila Gaura Kishore wanted to point out that the stench of false prestige, lust for the opposite sex, and desire for wealth under the pretense of service rendered unto the Lord emits a more impure odor than ordinary stool. Also, because of his growing fame, he would sometimes receive donations that were quite opulent. And he would always consider himself an unworthy Vaishnava. And rather than use the money or whatever it was that was given to him for himself, he would give it to another devotee that he knew. For himself, he did this madhukar, that he would beg from 1 to 7 houses and utilize whatever he got to maintain himself. Then he was associating quite regularly with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktivinoda Thakur made a garden. It was called Svananda Sukhada Kunj, which is very significant in these pastimes. Svananda Sukhada Kunj. Bhaktivinoda Thakur would sit in this garden and speak the scriptural realizations, speak from the scriptures. And Gaura Kishore Das Babaji would very often come and hear from him and sometimes stay overnight in that place. And at the time, as I read earlier, Bhaktivinoda Thakur pointed out Gaura Kishore Das Babaji to his son, Bhaktisiddhanta, that this, you can accept initiation from this person. And so it was in this garden, Svananda Sukhada Kunj, that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta first approached Gaura Kishore Das Babaji requesting initiation from him. So this is a wonderful pastime. We know that Bhaktisiddhanta is very, very learned. And when he was just a child, he knew the entire Bhagavad Gita. He could read and absorb books at an astonishing rate. He was expert astrologer. I've heard from Giriraj Swami that he read all the books that were available in the library, and the librarians ordered more books for him just so he could continue his studies, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And meanwhile, Gaura Kishore Das Babaji was not at all literate, not well read. So at the time that he prayed to Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji for initiation, Gaura Kishore, hearing his prayer, said to him, I must first ask Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu whether or not I can be merciful to you. Only then will I be able to give you my decision. So the next day, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur came back and asked, what did Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tell you? And the answer he heard was, I have forgotten to ask my Lord. So at that point, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was in great anxiety and distress. And he said, if you do not bestow your mercy upon me, I will be unable to live any longer. So on the third day, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur again approached Srila Gaura Kishore for initiation. And Gaura Kishore told him, I asked Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu if I could bestow my mercy upon you, but he replied, the quality of mundane morality and academic scholarship is considered insignificant in the light of pure devotion. Hearing this, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati boldly replied, you are the crown jewel of all deceptors who worship Lord Krishna, and now you will also try to deceive me? If I do not receive the mercy of your lotus feet, then I will certainly give up my life. Srila Ramanujacharya approached Goshti Purna 18 times for initiation and finally received his mercy. So I will continue to approach you until one day I will certainly receive your causeless mercy. This is my most serious promise. So seeing his intense desire and his sincerity, Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji did initiate him, and he was the sole initiate of Gaura Kishore Das Babaji. He felt genuine humility that he was not qualified to accept disciples, but seeing the intensity and the lack of false pride in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he made an exception in this case. So that was in the year 1900, in this same garden, Svananda Sukara Kunja. So the idea is that one who has this unflinching faith in God and the spiritual master, all the imports of the Vedic scriptures are revealed to him. And that was exemplified in Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj, which is why Srila Bhaktisiddhanta accepted him as his spiritual master and served him so sincerely. Then there's another pastime here from a grihasta. This newly married man went to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, who was a lifelong celibate, and he asked him some advice about the grihasta ashram. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati told him that persons who are married face many different kinds of impediments in the execution of devotional service. So the grihasta was not encouraged, the newly married man was not encouraged, and he brought the same question to Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji, who, as we said, had been married for some time. So Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj said, it's very good that you're discussing married life. Daily, you can cook an offering for Lord Vishnu with your own hands. Then, you may accept it as Mahaprasadam along with your religious wife. Instead of an exploitative mentality, you must always consider your wife a servant of Lord Krishna and a representative of your guru. If this is done, then everything will become auspicious for you. Everything in this material world is meant for the Lord's service, whether it be wealth, jewels, wife, or one's husband. Engage everything in Krishna's service. Always understand that your wife is not your servant, but a servant of Krishna. In this way, she should always be respected. A Vaishnava wife is extremely rare and difficult to find in this world. If one has the good fortune of having one, he should see it as a benediction from Krishna. The wife worships the husband as her Lord and Master. Similarly, the husband should worship the wife because she is Krishna dasi, a servant of Krishna. In this way, the husband can protect his devotional enthusiasm by not considering his wife to be his maidservant, but always the maidservant of Lord Krishna. So in 1914, on the 30th day of Kartik, at the end of the night, Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji left his mortal frame. And at that time, there were many owners of temples in the area, and they all wanted to claim his body to make a samadhi for him in their temple, because they knew that his fame was widespread and people would come there to offer respects to his samadhi, and they would offer darshan, or have darshan of the samadhi and offer donations. And they thought that it would be very lucrative for them to have the samadhi in their temple. So at that time, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur came there and refused permission for these various Babajis, or so-called Babajis of the different temples, to have his body. And a police constable also came because it became contentious, became quite contentious, this argument. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said they were trying to discredit him. The owners of these various temples were trying to discredit him. And he said, I am the sole disciple of Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. I have been celibate from birth. He said, if any of you can say that you have been celibate, have not had any illicit connection with a woman in the last 6 months, in the last 3 months, in the last month, in the last 3 days, then you can come forward and claim his body. And the police constable said to him, but how will you know who's telling the truth? And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, I will take their word for it. And when he challenged them in that way, they all turned and left in humiliation. And so he was able to establish himself in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, except there was one person who said that when Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj was alive, he said, after I pass away, you should drag my body through the dust in the streets of Navadvip. And so this person said this was his desire, so this is what we should do. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said this was spoken out of his intense humility. But we can see from the pastime of Haridas Thakur, when he left, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took his body in his arms and danced with his body. And he said, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur similarly said, Lord Krishna himself would carry Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji, such an exalted personality. So in that way he was able to establish his samadhi, which is there now in his mat in Mayapur. Have any of you seen the samadhi of Gaura Kishore Das Babaji? It's a beautiful murti of him there, looking very much like the painting also, absorbed in meditation. So those are some thoughts. I wanted to also speak about especially this idea of renunciation, that renunciation can also be understood as detachment. And it's a very important part of Krishna consciousness, and it needs to be understood in the proper perspective. I think we can take this idea of renunciation, he's known for vairagya, renunciation or detachment. So perhaps we can explore that for a few minutes as something that we can take away that's relevant to each and every one of us. We can begin from Bhagavad Gita in the first chapter. Arjuna is very keen to renounce. He sees the army arrayed before him, and in that army are his friends and relatives, teachers, superiors, and so he says it's better to live by begging rather than fight this horrible war. And he's ready to abandon his Kshatriya duties and go off to the forest. And Krishna says no, and speaks the entire Bhagavad Gita so that he does not renounce, does not detach himself in that way. And yet, we read just recently in our study of Srimad Bhagavatam, today we're on chapter 16, I think chapter 15 is the Pandavas retire timely. So at that time, Yudhishthira Maharaj, after the all the inauspicious signs that he sees from the age of Kali progressing, and hearing that Lord Krishna has left and Parikshit Maharaj is there to be established on the throne, at that time he decides that he will renounce and go to the Himalayas, and he leaves aside his royal dress, his empire, and does that, and he's followed by his brothers, including, of course, Arjuna. So just what Arjuna wanted to do in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he actually does in the 15th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, with Krishna's complete approval at that time. So we can understand from that that this detachment is related to time, place, and circumstance. That Bhagavad Gita was the wrong time, the wrong place, and the wrong circumstance, but later on, when those things were in proper order, then it was appropriate for Arjuna to renounce. And also we can note with profit that in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna wants to renounce and says, I shall not fight, he drops his famous Gandiva bow. At that time, he's overwhelmed with confusion. He's completely miserable. He's crying. So this kind of churning means there's something wrong here. He wants to go this way, but because there's so much confusion, so much misery, overpowered with emotion, you can see that's an indication that this is not the right time to renounce. Whereas we don't read any of that in the Pandavas retire timely. That at that point, his intelligence is focused and fixed, and there's none of this confusion and misery and crying that was so overwhelming in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita described there. And then, of course, there's so much knowledge that Krishna gives in Bhagavad Gita. Very often this idea of detachment is brought up. If you look at Bhagavad Gita with that in mind, you'll see repeatedly from the 2nd chapter to the 18th chapter, Krishna is telling Arjuna that you do your duty with full-hearted enthusiasm, but you're not attached to the results, which is a very, very difficult thing to do. I mean, we hear it a lot, but it's very actually difficult not to be attached to the results. But in fact, we don't have control over the results. All we have control over is our effort. And therefore, Prabhupada makes this famous statement, you act with valor and depend completely on the mercy of the Lord. We hear in Prahlad Maharaj's prayers, he says that the parents may try so strenuously to protect the child, and the child may still come to harm. The doctors may try so with all their skills and technological advancements to save the patient, and still the patient passes away. So the results are not in our hand. What is in our hand is the desire to do the very best we can in an effort to please Krishna, to please the spiritual master. So we should not ever confuse detachment with being unconcerned, with being aloof, with being uncaring. We heard earlier from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur that Gaura Kishore Das Babaji's affectionate nature was matchless. He was very affectionate, as Srila Prabhupada was very affectionate, very concerned about his disciples, about those who were not his disciples. So detachment can be confused by uninformed people, of being a kind of coldness or uncaring, and this is a misconception, actually. But detachment means detached from the material fluctuations, detached from dualities, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor, pain and pleasure. This is what we're detached from, but not from the advancement of our associates or people in general. And there are many, many examples of this in our scriptures, of people that were detached from all these material situations. I mean, we have certainly Parikshit Maharaj. He's in the prime of his life. He's the emperor of the world. He has a young family. And when he hears the curse, then he gives it all up. It's not like that he hangs on to it, that this is my life, this is my identity. No, my identity is to serve Krishna to the best of my ability. So in that relation, today is the 25th of November. Sunday was the 22nd of November, and someone asked me to do something on that day, and I was going to write it down in my calendar, and I saw that date, November 22nd, and a very dark, ominous feeling came over me, and I couldn't figure it out for a moment, and then I realized that for millions of people who are my age, who are from America, they will be impacted in the same way when they hear that date, because November 22nd was the date that John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated when he was on a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. And the whole country was traumatized. At that time, I was 14 years old. And I can remember sitting on my parents' bed watching the black and white television of the events that went on after his assassination. It was such an impactful experience. And I couldn't really express why until I heard Srila Prabhupada's explanation years later. And Prabhupada said, just look at John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He was born in a wealthy family, an aristocratic family. He was very intelligent and he was well educated. He was charismatic. He could speak very nicely and captivate your attention and allegiance. He had a beautiful and accomplished wife, Jacqueline Kennedy. He had 2 very wonderful children. And on top of all that, he was the most powerful man in the world as President of the United States of America. And within 1 second, it was finished. Within 1 second, all that was finished. So I think everyone felt that at that time. We didn't express it. We had no context, no philosophy. But I certainly felt impacted in that way, and it all made sense, of course, hearing Srila Prabhupada's explanation. That all these material things are on the pinnacle. This person was on the pinnacle of everything anyone could want. And like this, it was finished. So that's what we're supposed to do now as brahmacharis and brahmacharinis, is develop this sense of detachment from everything material while applying ourselves fully to whatever service we're doing for Krishna. And then when the time comes that we must leave this body, we don't know when that is, but ordinarily it won't be very soon. It'll be many decades from now. But when that time does come, we can be detached from everything material. So I hope there's some points to discuss on this. Please.
Listening to your commentaries, I can only refer to Mother Kalangana's pastimes, because I remember she was extremely kind to me during a period of my life while I was serving, but at the end, she did nothing but chastise me. And told me off. And then one day she said, what's wrong? Can't you hear me? And this was in front of the toilets. And everybody was there. And I said, she said, are you deaf? And I said, yes, I'm deaf in my left side, you see. And so I couldn't hear her properly, she said. And then she chastised me even more. And but certainly, in the end, she said, Krishna will smash you. And that was her sort of her parting chastisement. And I didn't know what she meant, but certainly my spiritual master, he gave me an instruction for whatever reasons I became confused about. He said to me, you must rest more. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. He smashed me with that single instruction, because I had the dilemma trying to serve the temple, the dilemma of serving the temple at the same time. The management couldn't do anything about my service. They couldn't cover me, they said. And so she was right. Krishna smashed me with something I couldn't do, but I didn't go back to him. That was my unfortunate position with my confusion. And that's when really things started to really go wrong, when I couldn't follow my spiritual master's instruction. And unfortunately, I was smashed. But now I'm trying to get back on the path, with the association of the devotees here, who are very kind and encouraging. And certainly the Guru Tattva is an amazing thing, but it was good fortune for me that somehow I had mercy in two ways, of encouragement, but then to be finally, you could say, as Mother Kalinga said, Krishna will smash you. And I suppose that was the blessing. You know, and I'm still not smashed, but I'm trying to be. Yeah. So that's what I can say there. It can be confusing, so do what you can. If you're unsure with your spiritual master about something, you must go back to him and inquire from him what to do. Not say, oh, he's busy. I would always encourage you to go back to your spiritual master with any dilemma. Unfortunately, I didn't, so that's my point of view anyway. Okay, Hare Krishna, thank you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much for the wonderful class and the wonderful talk. I had a question. You were speaking on Arjuna and how, based on the particular circumstance, he had the chance to renounce, and on the other circumstance in Bhagavad Gita he couldn't. So I just wanted to ask, in light of this, for us as we're practicing devotional life, we're trying to do different services, different activities, and we do have some level of attachment to them and to the results. How do we know what's the best time for us to kind of be detached from a situation, or to actually keep on going with our particular service, or how do we move on from it, or how do we know what's a sign for us to kind of be detached from a situation, if it's not breeding results, if it's breeding results, and move on to something else?
Yeah. We can look at Prabhupada's life for an example of that. He went to Jhansi first and tried to establish the League of Devotees. And there were different obstacles there, although there was also some success. But then he realized at some point that it was not going the way he wanted, and then he changed his. So there is a time that we can change services, can change our focus. But I think it has to be done with great care and with consultation with others, our well-wishers, to determine when that time is and when we should actually persevere. There's another case in Juhu, when there was actually 2 years of fighting, legal fighting over the property, and Prabhupada could have said, okay, it's too difficult, but no. At that point he said, no, this is our property, this is for Radharasa Bihari, and we're going to stay there. And so it's really time, place, and circumstance, and sometimes it may be difficult for us to know when to continue and when to shift. So then we turn to responsible, mature well-wishers who can have some perspective and guide us.
Hare Krishna, Marji, thank you for the class. Our question is about Babajis, and if Babajis are suitable to the organization of ISKCON.
When Prabhupada was present, there was one devotee who was told by his doctors that he had 6 months left to live. And he told that to Srila Prabhupada and said he wanted to spend his last 6 months in Vrindavan, or Mayapur, one or the other, just chanting Hare Krishna. And Prabhupada gave him Babaji initiation and let him do that. But unfortunately the doctors were wrong. He didn't die in 6 months. He kept living. And then he gave up his interest in chanting continuously in the Dham. And so that was the first and last Babaji initiation that Prabhupada gave. So I think, we have age of Kali minds that tend to be rather unsteady and unpredictable. So it's always best for us to take a humble position rather than to jump. I mean, that's a very elevated stage that should never be imitated. One who imitates does to his detriment and does to the detriment of those who see him. So better to remain in one of the 4 ashrams that we're familiar with rather than go to Babaji.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, thank you for the class. How does renunciation come? Is it just gradually through purification, or can one actually do anything to become more renounced?
That's a wonderful question. I think that's answered in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna tells us to get a higher taste. That's really the real renunciation, is when we're no longer even considering whatever it was that was attractive to us before materially, but we have a taste for this beautiful, mischievous boy who's breaking butter pots and running in fear of his mother. And that will automatically make us detached. If we try in any other way, an artificial way, then it won't last. It'll be come and go. But we're so fortunate that we have this process where we can sing beautiful bhajans, chant Hare Krishna, have wonderful prasadam. So in this way, the senses can remain peaceful and satisfied while we do attain this higher taste through chanting and honoring prasadam and studying philosophy and so forth. This process is unexcelled, requiring the higher taste. Thank you so much for your attention. All glories to Srila Gaura Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.